Oh,
Originally New York City.
New York City. Okay. That's a
and I'm from Jersey.
Jersey and New York City. So you guys
And by way of Israel, I did live in Israel also 15 years.
where?
And in Givatayim.
Oh, nice. Very
And
hot.
I went to high school there, then Army, and then I did med school there. And I married my wife there, too. I met my wife, Sunette, who is Rhodesian. Actually, that's now Zimbabwe. Yeah. So,
Cool.
and we're here now.
And you're here now. And she speaks English. Speak English there with a kind of a
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sort of British. Yeah. Well, it's sort of a South African.
South African
More
accent, yeah.
than British, kind of. Yeah.
Yeah. I was in Australia last year and stayed with a South African family that lived in Rhodesia, and they all had very strong South African accents. Although in Australia, it's hard to tell them apart.
Mhm.
Okay, great. Can you see my screen over here?
I can see the Stones That Speak screen. It's the big, and I can see you as a little icon there.
Perfect.
At the corner. Yeah.
Perfect. And I am recording this, so this is not to scare you or anything, but just to show you as a sample. If you would want to send the recording out to any of your peers or colleagues, you could say, well, this is a sample of what can be done, what will be done.
Great.
Yeah, and then obviously if someone wants to participate in the class and can't make it that week, well, then they can listen to the recording and, of course, follow up with any questions, or we can also, maybe host some online discussion questions in between sessions, things like that.
And you could go into this at the end, but I think the most practical way we're a very small congregation, and probably the most practical thing for us would be to join one of the bigger congregations you work with in Tucson for like their programs. If there's any way you could hook us up with them or get permission from them so I could find out who over there I have to contact so they can give us a heads up when, you have programs with them. And I mean, theoretically, any place we could do it, I guess anywhere on the West Coast. But, I wouldn't see us necessarily setting up programs for ourselves because we'll just be 1 to 2 people,
Okay, so we got to each other from Rena Libskind, and the only programs we've done with her so far have been to her Hebrew school students. But that doesn't mean that her congregation wouldn't be interested in this. We can ask her, and we can ask and post, regional or national. We can do that. It's just we haven't done it yet. We've largely done to large groups at a time. But doesn't mean it can't be done. We've done it to students online in this format, and we've done it to adults in one location. But I would very much like to do the format that you're doing. But we could talk about that after the logistics.
Sure.
Okay, so you recognize this chotemet in Hebrew is a stamp, obviously. So you recognize the symbol, and what is it?
It's a menorah.
There we go. So menorah, as we know.
Chanukiah.
There we go.
No, it's not a Chanukiah. It's a menorah.
Exactly.
I was right the first time.
So Steve, tell us the difference between those.
Well, the Chanukiah is the one that has 9 total. And the menorah is what was originally in the temple, so that's 7.
That's 7. Right. So this one, you went back and forth. It's a menorah, and a Chanukiah, and a menorah. So this one is what?
That's a menorah.
This is menorah. Like why? Obviously, looking at it, why would you be able to identify this as the menorah one?
Because it's definitely not 8. I think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It looks like 6, actually. Yeah.
So 7.
It's 7.
Or maybe 7.
It's 7, but it's also very old, right?
Yeah.
Which means that it was probably found before the holiday of Hanukkah. So if it was found before the holiday of Hanukkah, then certainly it wasn't the Chanukiah, which we light nowadays with 9, which is 8 plus 1. It was the temple setting, because that's so. But this also tells us that this is the oldest symbol of Judaism, and not which one is more popular today.
Oh, Magen David.
Magen David, super popular. People think, oh, Magen David, ancient times, Star of David, right?
Yeah.
Star of David does not appear anywhere in ancient times. This does. This is the oldest symbol of Judaism that still exists today. So that is our first stone that speaks. Okay, this stone speaks as the oldest symbol of Judaism today. Let's take a look more about where it comes from. So this is, as you can see, a Heliodorus stele. Are you familiar with the word stele or this image, this artifact over here?
You'll have to remind me what a stele is. I don't.
Okay. It's this artifact that you see here in front of you. Obviously old, obviously ancient. It was obviously broken in places, but it had writing on it. And it had writing, and I'll click on this link and it will bring us to a more of a, informational site. It's an inscription. Even though most of my slideshow is in images, I offer this also, and after the session I would send the slideshow to anyone, or even before the session, and people can read up more on information on their own, or we can talk about it a little bit. So just kind of skimming this, it's a stone stela. It was written, it's nearly 3 feet high, has a pointer gable, it's in Greek. Okay, so that tells us when it was written, around the time, and we can identify it from the books of 1 and 2 Maccabees. You heard of the book of the Maccabees at all?
Yes.
Okay, so that means it's really, really old. Okay, number 1. Again, stones that speak. And it says dramatic new light on the run-up to the Maccabean revolt in the 2nd century, etc. So this tells us more about the Maccabean revolt, which means we're learning more about the Hanukkah story. So if we did this session, we could do this story around Hanukkah time. So we still have one. So we know what a stele is. We know when it was written. We still don't know about this Heliodorus fellow. So we're going to learn more about him. Helio in Greek is sun. Okay, it was a popular name at the time. So we're going to keep that in mind as well. You can go for a place, digging for things like the Heliodorus stele. You can dig for a day in a place called Beit Guvrin. It's near Beit Shemesh, and that's also clickable. And we did this actually for my son's bar mitzvah. We took my whole family who came in from Israel, and we took some friends from here, and we went on this fabulous dig for a day. It was excellent for all ages. It's an archaeological dig, and we found pottery shards, and we found ancient perfume bottles, and we found bones of animals that were 2,000 years old. It was so exciting because you do find things, it's guaranteed. But what the guy told us, what at this place in Dig for a Day, it did exist in Maccabean times, and it had caves just like this one, and we were sitting there digging, and he said this place was dug. It was Jewish villages that when the Maccabees came, we tend to idealize them, romanticize them, these great, fabulous Jewish heroes, kind of like Daniel Craig in ancient times. And part of that might have been true, but part of that is they were also radicals on some level. And they would go from village to village, and they would say, Mila Hashem Elai, who is for me, who is for God, come with me. But they didn't really give you a choice, because whoever didn't, they would say, we're going to destroy your town. So they weren't so romantic. Not all of them. Again, I'm sure some of them were. Some of them were a bit more radical. And what we were digging up were people who had fled their homes rather than be forced to join the Maccabees. So we were finding old Jewish homes in ancient times who were more Hellenistic, who were more assimilated, who prayed to Greek gods, and who weren't so into Mila Hashem Elai, who weren't so into believing in the one God. So that's more of the story of stones that speak. It's not all this romantic Maccabean story. So just telling you again where we were. If this is the map of Israel, this is where we were digging. This was in 178 BC. That's when the story happened. So you said you heard of the 2nd book of the Maccabees. Any other information you know in it, about it, nearby it? What do we know about what else?
It's just part of the Apocrypha, right?
Yeah. Okay. Fine. So the Maccabees, as we know, there are books written 1 and 2, and they were not canonized, meaning they're not part of our Holy Scripture. They're not part of the 24 books of Holy Scripture, but we do know they were famous. So here's obviously a romanticized image of a Maccabee, and here is what? What is this guy over here?
That's that's the high priest, obviously.
Yeah, that's the high priest.
Would be Mattathias, I guess.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Right, one of them. We don't know exactly which one. And we know the Hanukkah story told us about the joining of the Maccabees, who were protecting or wanting to protect the high priests who were thrown out of the temple. And here again, stones that speak, the oldest Jewish symbol in history. So the leader at the time was the great king Antiochus Epiphanes, and he called himself the Holy Epiphanes Nicanor, which means image of God, bearer of victory. That's what he liked to have stamped on his coins. So what does he think of himself?
Deity.
Yeah, he's pretty high on himself, this Antiochus, and he was the emperor, and he certainly exercised that right. And interestingly enough, I live on a street called Bernike, which is the name of a Greek queen around that time period. And the street just over this way is Rehov Nicanor Street. So my whole area is named after people who lived in this time. So,
you live in Jerusalem?
I live in Jerusalem.
Oh, okay.
And all the neighborhoods of Jerusalem are named after different time periods of Jewish and Israeli history. So I live in the Greek Hellenic period. I'm sorry?
Oh, is it interesting?
Yeah, it is actually, because I had no idea about that when I moved in here. So just giving us some background information. So here were the Jews, mostly poor farmers, and the high priests were thrown out of the temple, and they were covered up by this Antiochus, this king who thought highly of himself, who also, he thought himself he was the chosen of God, bearer of victory, so really high in himself. And this is when he ruled. He chose the name Epiphanes, and most people called him the madman because they didn't think he was such a great king after all. What did he do to the Jewish people? What started the whole revolt of Jewish farmers and the Maccabees against the Greeks? They said, you can't do a couple of things. Just any background? What are you familiar with in that story?
Well, you couldn't study Torah. You couldn't circumcise. You could. I guess that worship was pretty much restricted, and I guess Greek, according to what they told us in Hebrew school, which may be a little oversimplified, but a Greek practice was encouraged. He would put I think he put a statue of Zeus in the temple actually, and they defiled the temple ultimately, and turned it into like a center for the Greek religious practices. So.
Absolutely, you nailed that one down. So the Greeks were saying we got to get rid of Jewish worship. So let's isolate. If we could isolate Judaism into three things, they chose these three. One, as you mentioned, circumcision. That's our covenant with God. They said, forget about that. No more covenant with God. They said no more Shabbat. Shabbat symbolizes the Jewish people. Okay, this was before Christianity. So there were no religions that had a day dedicated to one God. It was a monotheistic thought based on one God creating the world. They were pagan gods based on many gods creating different elements of the world. So Shabbat went totally against paganism. So they said, that's it, getting rid of Shabbat. And as you mentioned, they figured out pretty easily that Torah study, Torah learning kept our Jewish faith together. So they said, fine, we'll outlaw Torah study. And as you can, well, this isn't actually an authentic picture of them, but they did burn Torahs and they did forbid Jewish study of Torah. You know the dreidel story?
That supposedly, if a group of Jews were together surreptitiously studying Torah, if they saw a Greek soldier, they could pretend that they were gambling, just playing like a game with dreidel and,
Right. So that story, I've grown up my whole life hearing that story, but at some point, I don't know if someone pointed it out to me or I realized that, well, dreidel is a Yiddish word, and
that's
Yiddish
right.
Certainly was not around at the times of the Maccabees.
Except Sivivon is Hebrew.
Sivivon is Hebrew, yes. But again, we're not sure when that entered. So that's one of those Magen David, Star of David stories, which is fact, which is legend. Sometimes it gets mixed up in our history, which is also interesting to look at stones that speak, to look at the actual story. So these things we know from the book of the Maccabees and the Chotemet, the symbol of the menorah, we know. The dreidel, we don't know. It's not fact as much as the other stones that we have here in this story. And as you mentioned, they did defile the temple. Again, the temple was our one connection to our one God, monotheistic faith. They said none of that. It's now pagan, and they put pigs and they put pagan gods in the temple to show who was in charge and to show they are completely getting rid of our monotheistic faith, which does defy Jews as a monotheistic religion. Very unusual in ancient times to have a monotheistic faith. But the story gets deeper. Remember our friend Heliodorus. So in 178 BC, Seleucus, another Greek minister, sent Heliodorus to Jerusalem to collect money to pay the Romans taxes, right? The Greek Romans were in charge of Israel. We have to pay our taxes. So he sent them to collect money. You could say, fine, that's no reason to revolt. It can get worse. Technically, he said, the stele, the Heliodorus stele, tells us that he actually sent Heliodorus to collect the tax money from the temple. So not only were we being paid to collect taxes, but temple taxes. Why would you think that would be more upsetting for the Jewish people?
Because the temple is dedicated to God and
Right.
not to the, the Greek Roman leadership.
Right. So you could say, fine, it's fine to have an emperor in charge of a country and you're going to pay taxes and your dues to whatever. We still pay governmental taxes, like it or not. We all have to do it. But to now say, if you're going to take your synagogue taxes and the government's going to step in and take that, whoa, right? That's a little invasive. That's offensive. That's not necessary. And that might have been one of the straws that broke the camel's back, so to speak, in getting the Maccabees to revolt. So here's just a little insider look to the temple.
היי לכולם, הכנתי לכם.
Because sometimes, obviously this is all, we're not going to look at the whole thing, but this is all recreated, obviously. But we want to see how beautiful it was, why it was so offensive that someone would come and actually say this is what they were paying taxes on. You can see that the temple did require a tremendous amount of maintenance, very large space, lots of upkeep, lots of maintenance, but you can't hear it?
Not well, no. Is there any way for us to sort of text you messages? Yes.
How's that?
Chat. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Hi, Joe. Welcome back.
Thanks.
Sure. You okay?
I was still listening.
Oh, okay. Did you catch the part about how they sent Heliodorus to collect the temple taxes?
Yes.
Okay, because that's like the whole clincher of the story. So here's just kind of a 3D virtual walk. Perhaps the temple didn't look exactly like this. We don't know exactly what it looked like, but just looking at how much maintenance the temple did require, the beautiful vessels, they had musical instruments, they had a lot of instruments for the sacrifices, they had space for people to come and worship and pray and deal with the sacrifices. They had the Holy of Holies. Obviously, the temple was a huge enterprise and needed a lot of behind-the-scenes work, which we don't often think about. You know, we kind of think about the spiritual place, but it was much like a synagogue, right? You need a caretaker. You need the Levi'im, the Levites served as, what role the Levites served as?
Well, as assistants to the Kohanim, also ritual service and keeping the Eish Tamid burning. That was one of the roles. General cleanup, getting, rid of, because sacrifices were going on all the time, so there's a lot of just technical work involved in, clearing things out and keeping things going.
Certainly. They also served the role of musicians. They were musicians, okay, and they would play music every day. All those beautiful musical instruments was the role of the Levites. You were a Levite, you better have had a good voice.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's one of their legacies. So now we have all these reasons why the Maccabees were planning this revolt against the Greeks. They had many, 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 many reasons, perhaps more than we thought before. So we know the story. It was these tremendously armed Greek empire against us, right? And who were we? What was the main occupation at the time for Jews in those days?
Agriculture.
Yeah, agriculture, farmers, certainly not warriors, certainly not blacksmiths, certainly not swordsmen. So when we talk about the miracle, people usually talk about which kind of miracle of Hanukkah?
The oil.
The oil. Right, which certainly was a miracle. I'm not belittling that in any way. But this was also a miracle. In what way?
Well, the minority, very small army defeated a very organized, powerful army.
Yeah. You could almost say, looking back at Israel's founding of the state in 1948 and again in 1967, when you had multiple powerful Arab countries against tiny Israel. In 1948, we had 600,000 people living here against multiple well-equipped Arab armies who were merging together against Israel. It's kind of the same story right here, repeated 2,000 years later. So it was not the Maccabees' tremendous strength and Herculean muscles that is romanticized in history. It was hand of God, or maybe some really good ambush attacks, because we were at least on home soil and they were foreigners, and that is always an advantage in battle. So that summarizes kind of the Hanukkah story on a different level. This is a song by the Maccabees that also summarizes the Hanukkah story. Have you heard of the Maccabees?
Oh yeah, and I've seen this video too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
You like it?
Great. Yeah.
Great. Okay, so we don't have to watch it if you've seen it before.
Oh no, but maybe Joe wants to see it. Yeah.
Have you seen it, Joe?
I haven't seen it before.
Okay, so Steve, you'll suffer through it again.
Sure.
I'll tell a tale, yeah. Of Maccabees in Israel, yeah. When the Greeks tried to assail, yeah. But it was all to no avail, yeah. The war went on and on and on, until the mighty Greeks were gone, yeah. I put my lockers in the air sometimes, saying hey, oh, spin the dreidel. Just wanna celebrate for all 8 nights, singing hey, oh, light the candle. We say Alhamdulillah, oh yeah, for all 8 nights. Then we play dreidel by the candlelight. And I told you once, now I told you twice, about the miracle of the candlelight. They took the field. Their rivals thought, are they for real? Those Maccabees, they never yield. They charged ahead with sword and shield. Yeah, the war went on and on and on, until the mighty Greeks were gone, yeah. I put my lockers in the air sometimes, saying hey, oh, spin the dreidel. Just wanna celebrate for all 8 nights, singing hey, oh, light the candle. We say ma'otur, oh yeah, for all 8 nights. Then we play dreidel by the candlelight. And I told you once, now I told you twice, about the miracle of the candlelight. And the great menorah, for 8 days it kept on burning. What a celebration, a great return to Torah learning. 'Cause I can feel it, and Nes gadol, hayasham, Nes gadol, hayasham, Nes gadol, hayasham, sham. And my lockers in the air sometimes, saying hey, oh, spin the dreidel. Just wanna celebrate for all 8 nights, singing hey, oh, light the candles. We say ma'otur, oh yeah, for all 8 nights. Then we play dreidel by the candlelight. And I told you once, now I told you twice, about the miracle of the candlelight.
That was cute.
Yes, that's the Maccabees. They became internationally famous. That video has been viewed more than 4 million times.
Oh boy.
And they have launched a whole career. They did this for fun, and they are now internationally famous. They did concerts all over the world, very well sought after, and
They've been to Tucson.
Yeah, have they?
like some sort of a celebration. Maybe it was Independence Day or something like that at the JCC.
Oh, cool. Did you hear them?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, and how were they?
Great.
They were great. I haven't heard them. Just watch their videos. They've made videos on every holiday. So they release one before every holiday and see how many hits they get, etc. So they're always a good educational source as well. I make my kids watch all their videos, but my kids are Israeli. They don't necessarily get all the cultural nuances and things. Anyway,
when could I just ask, when you show a YouTube video, it's not really like you're watching on YouTube. It's kind of choppy, right? That sort of it gets degraded a little bit, or there's no way to actually see it like a real video, or
you can. I'm sharing it on my screen. So if it's choppy, I would take the link. I would put it in the chat box, which I could. One second. I just put a word in the chat box. I don't know if you can see it. If you scroll around on your screen.
Yeah, I'm seeing chat box. Okay, yeah.
So I can put links in here, and I can tell you, and everyone could watch it on their own computer. We would mute. I would mute you, or you would mute yourself, and then you would say, "Okay, tell me when you're done," and then everyone would come back together again afterwards. So that is definitely an option. Yeah. And people can chat, and we're a small group, and we're kind of able to talk. But if it was a larger group, and we would ask a question, what do the stones say? Who is Heliodorus? What do you know about Hanukkah history? Everyone could chat in their answers, and we could all learn from each other that way as well.
Yeah, can you raise your hand? And where is that exactly?
You can do that too, but you could just type in the chat box and any questions. If if someone's talking, me or another speaker's talking, you don't interrupt, but you have a question, you can put it in the chat, and then we keep our eye on the chat the whole class, and then as soon as we see a question in and there's a good time to pause, we pause and address the question.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, if you ask a question to the group and somebody does want to raise their hand, say, is there an option? Because I don't really see it here, the option raise your hand.
The option to raise your hand.
Raise your hand, yeah, and I don't know.
1 second, let me stop the screen share. Yeah, so next to your name.
Next to my name.
Do you see where it says participants on the bottom?
Yes.
So if you click on that.
Oh, okay. Okay. Steve Marin. Yeah, I don't.
Oh, I see that.
Yeah, but I see mute and rename, 2 buttons.
Down at the bottom, it says raise hand.
Yeah.
Does it?
At
At
the
the
lower
bottom?
right hand.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay. Got it. All right, great, thanks.
Okay. But we don't have to be so formal. It's a group, and it would be more of a casual setting. You're all from home. This isn't synagogue. It's not a sermon. I appreciate questions in the chat because then I want to address your needs. It's not about me. It's about you and your interests. So I appreciate that. But thank you for the formality. You certainly can use it if you want. But in these settings, we try and make it be more about you, the participants.
Okay.
Okay, so if we go back to our Heliodorus stele, we would want to ask, what words do the stones say? If we say stones speak, and that was the topic of this session, what would they were in a full class? There are 2 more stories of ancient Israel that we would go through, but we're just doing a little mini one now. So my question to you, the participants, is what words does the Heliodorus stele say to you now that you've incorporated this story into the Hanukkah story and seen where it comes from? What words would this stele say to you?
Well, it's a historical, it verifies aspects of the story. That there was an attempt to forcibly.
Have you lost the screen?
No, I've still got the screen.
You lost it. Click on the icon of the Zoom. It's blue with a white video camera in the middle. If you click on that, you'll get back to us. Do you see it?
Yes.
Okay. So, Steve, if you were saying that this steel was somehow making a world tour and it was coming to Tucson, and you'd want it to be in the newspaper or on headlines, you would say, what would you say? This steel is? How would you describe it?
Well, it's it's
Just
like
the headline. Yeah.
Evidence, objective evidence of the veracity of the Hanukkah story.
Fantastic. That would encourage me to come see it, right? I'd want to see that. So objective historical artifact comes to Tucson of, biblical times or of ancient time. Well, it wasn't biblical after that, right? So that would be a great headline. Joe, would you have a headline?
I'm sorry?
Would you have a headline for this steel? If it was coming to Tucson, how would you advertise it in your local paper?
I'm not sure.
You'd go along with Steve's.
Yeah.
Okay, Steve, we're all buying your paper this week. Okay. So
and the language was Greek, or was a language, or is it in a number of languages?
This is written in Greek. The steel itself was written in Greek. Yeah.
Not like the Rosetta Stone that was written in a zillion languages.
Right, but that further reinforces the Maccabean revolt story because it dates it.
Right.
Okay, so that was our stones that speak. The next story would be Masada and the etc. and the stones that were found in Masada. This is the stone that was found in Masada, which is the name Elazar ben Yair, which means Elazar, the son of Yair, and that the whole Masada legend is based on the archaeological evidence that we have there, Josephus, and very much based on this stone. And they found a bunch of these that they wrote their names and possibly drew lots, that they would kill each other, and the last one standing would kill himself, so they wouldn't have to give themselves up to the Romans as slaves or worse.
Is it true that that's been historically, that the story has been challenged?
I think it has been challenged. There's no 100% proof. They're piecing together the archaeological evidence based on what's there at Masada. The places that were built by Herod but used as a synagogue, water houses and silos that were built by Herod but used as a mikvah, ritual bath. So they have evidence that it was built by Herod. They have evidence that Jews lived there. They have evidence that it was at the time of the Roman destruction of the temple, that it even lasted for up to 2 years after the destruction of the temple, when the Romans were still in Israel and exiling or enslaving or murdering all Jews. So they put those stories together, and plus they found this and all these little lots. The challenge is that they didn't find bodies. So they said if this did happen, their bodies would be there. But then you say, well, perhaps the Romans carried them off. They were so embarrassed they didn't want people saying this about them. So perhaps they found the bodies, so they wouldn't necessarily leave them there, bury them properly. They weren't into sanctification of the dead, clearly. So they found one child's body and one woman. So perhaps they were killed first and they were hidden by their families, and so it is debatable. These are all the stones that were found with all the people's names on them.
Which were actually the lots, supposedly, that they were deciding who would kill whom or who would have to,
Exactly. Yeah. And they agreed to kill the women and children first. And then the men were supposed to kill each other, and the last one standing would kill himself. That's the way the legend goes. Again, it's not provable, but there is strong evidence for it. But everyone can decide for themselves. Powerful story. And every year in Israel, they play opera. They play the opera Carmen, which has a tragic ending. They play it on Masada at midnight.
Didn't know that.
Yeah. And they schlep all the equipment up there. Imagine what that's like, schlepping all that up a cable car.
Whoa.
Yeah.
How long have they been doing that? Because, I left Israel early 80s. I guess but that was a long time ago.
Right. I think about, I'm not sure, a couple of years for sure, because I do hear about it, and they have this clip. I don't think, yeah, this isn't the whole thing, but they show you a bit of the actors, the actresses.
So obviously the Israel opera.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Sorry?
Oh, I was just saying it's obviously the Israel opera
Yeah.
company. Yeah, which used to be amateur when I was there.
Oh, it's pretty,
I was
yeah,
living.
they're pretty sophisticated in that. They sing in Italian, they sing in Hebrew, they sing in French. You see there are children, so it is a pretty intense place. And there are all sorts of ceremonies up there. The IDF does ceremonies, swearing in ceremonies up there.
Yeah, that's been there for a while.
Yeah, there are bar and bat mitzvah ceremonies. There's a lot going on in Masada. And then the last one was the Galil and the Beit Alpha Synagogue. This is up north. This is in the 6th century, so moving up a couple hundred years. And here you have, what religion does this look like?
Greek, I guess, yeah.
Yeah.
It's a, what do you call them? Centaur,
yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, the head of that would be the head of a horse. The head of the horse's body and a.
Well, the human.
Yeah.
The front part is a human, and the back part is a horse, right? With a centaur.
Yeah. But clearly, we agree this is a pagan form and a zodiacal or mythological figure. So, a question you might ask yourself is, what in the world is this doing in a synagogue? Right? Nowadays, we would think, wow, that's kind of dramatic and heretical, perhaps. We would use
strange.
Yes, definitely. And there are many pagan or Jewish, right? So there are many of these pagan symbols in Jewish synagogues in the 6th century. So this was about 400 years after the Maccabean revolt. And this, remember, we go back to our friend Heliodorus. Remember what the word helio means?
Yeah, sun.
Sun. Okay, well, here he is, God of the sun. Here you have the symbol of the circle. You have the rays of light coming from his head. So Heliodorus, a popular Greek name, obviously based on a pagan god. And here you have the symbol of Helio, god of the sun, in a Jewish synagogue. So we're like, what's up, right? Stones that speak. What do these stones tell us? Okay, zodiacal, Helios, Titan, god of the sun, pagan or Jewish. So it's telling us that, and here again, symbol of the zodiac. All the symbols of the, whenever you're born, you have your zodiacal symbol. Do you know your zodiacal symbols? I'm a Libra. Do you know what you are?
Oh, yeah, Cancer.
Aries.
There you go. Okay, so we all know our zodiacal symbols, but did we know that they were in synagogues in the 5th century? Those symbols, right. So these stones are telling us a serious story. And they are telling us that mosaics, and they also, in these synagogues, they also had mosaics that told biblical stories. Here you have the menorot, you have the temple signs, you have the Akedat Yitzchak. This is the sacrifice of the binding of Isaac. Here's the donkey, and Abraham telling the boy, you stay here, I'm going to continue on with my son Isaac. All of this is in this one synagogue, all these zodiacal signs and all these biblical signs. So these words are telling us what?
They're telling us that there were inroads of Greek culture even in synagogue.
Exactly.
Which is actually, that's really in the Talmud. They have Aristotelian logic, and so even though there was at the time of the Maccabean revolt, there was very extreme reaction to anything Greek. It looks like Greek culture made inroads anyway, and that there's a lot of Greek terminology in the Talmud too. So
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, historically, when the Romans destroyed the temple, the Jews were exiled, but obviously some stayed and some came back. So then you had Jews living with Greeks. The Greek and the Romans were the dominant culture. So you could continue to revolt and revolt and revolt and rebel and rebel. Or you could say, hey, you know what? They were letting us on some level. Obviously, it was a synagogue, so obviously we were allowed to pray, right? But mosaics were popular. Zodiacal signs were popular. So why not decorate our synagogues with the beautiful culture of our surroundings? And as you say, it was just a cultural thing. It was not meant to be heretical. It didn't necessarily mean the Jews believed in pagan gods. It might have, but probably not, because it was a temple. It was a synagogue. It was probably just a cultural thing. Flash forward to Italian times. There is an Italian synagogue in the center of town here in Jerusalem, and I'm pointing behind me because it's about 15 that way. And they have beautiful artifacts from all of Italy. In World War II, when the Nazis destroyed almost all Italian synagogues at the time, there was a Jewish Italian after the war that went from community to community and took whatever remnants there were from any Italian synagogue, and he was very wealthy, and he shipped them all to Israel. And most of them are housed in this beautiful Italian synagogue in town. And there is a beautiful sink where the Kohanim, the priests, and the Levites would come and wash their hands before the prayers. And it has cupids on it made out of gold. So again, that is not something from Jewish culture. That is something from Christian culture. But we know Italy was pretty big on Christian culture, right? So it certainly didn't mean that Jews believed in Christianity. It just meant that we acculturated and we took the beautiful symbols of the culture surrounding us and incorporated them into our beauty, into our facade, and it's a beautiful synagogue. So all these stones tell us stories about Israeli history, about Jewish history, about the culture that we lived in, and about the straws that broke the camel's back, so to speak. So that is our stones that speak in a nutshell. It went a little longer than usual, but that would be the overlay. So we had the Maccabean story, we had the Masada story. The stones can tell us stories of courage. The stones can tell us stories of Jewish pride in terms of the mosaic. And it was also around Hanukkah time. So it would be around Hanukkah Shabbat.
Okay. Yeah, would you be able to send us a link to the recording you did?
Yes, I will do that.
Oh, great. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was great. Yeah, I forward to, participating in programs. Just if you could somehow hook us up with the bigger groups.